The night Caven left Thornhallow, the stars had hidden their faces behind bruised clouds. Ilara remembered every detail with the cruel clarity that only heartbreak could preserve. The way his hands had shaken when he cupped her face, the way his voice had cracked when he spoke the words that would echo through 2 years of silence. 3 weeks, he had promised, his wolf-bright eyes blazing with an intensity that made her soul ache. The coronation will take 3 weeks. Then I will send for you. I will announce you as my queen before the entire realm, and nothing, not politics, not tradition, not the entire council of elders, will stop me from making you mine in the eyes of every wolf in Eldrin. She had believed him. How could she not? This was Caven, the man who had found her half-frozen in the forest 2 winters ago, a runaway servant with no name and no family. The man who had brought her to his remote estate to recover, and never asked her to leave. The man who had spent months earning her trust, before confessing that his wolf had recognized her the moment their eyes met. Mate. The word still sent shivers down her spine. I will wait, Ilara had whispered against his lips, however long it takes. Caven had pulled back to look at her, his expression fierce with emotion. Then he had done something that shocked them both. He had bitten her. Not the full claiming mark that required witnesses and ceremony. Something smaller, more intimate. A crescent of teeth pressed into the curve of her hip, hidden where no one would ever see. A secret promise written in flesh and blood. This binds us, he had growled, his mouth still warm against her skin. Until I can mark you properly, this will remind you that you belong to me, and I to you. The wound had healed within hours, leaving a silvery scar that pulsed with warmth whenever she thought of him. That warmth had sustained her through the first week of his absence, through the second, through the third. On the 21st day, a rider had arrived at Thornhallow. Ilara had run to the courtyard, her heart soaring with desperate hope. But the messenger wore the colors of the capital, not Caven's personal guard. His face was carefully blank as he handed a scroll to the estate's elderly caretaker. What news? Ilara had demanded, abandoning all pretense of being a mere servant. What word from the king? The caretaker had read the message twice before looking at her with something that might have been pity. His Majesty King Caven, the old man said slowly, has taken Lady Morwen of House Crestwyn as his chosen queen. The wedding will take place on the next full moon. All subjects are commanded to rejoice. The world had tilted beneath Ilara's feet. That's impossible. She heard herself speaking from very far away. He promised. The message bears the royal seal. The caretaker's voice was gentle but firm. I am sorry, child. Whatever you believed existed between you and the king, it appears you were mistaken. Mistaken. The word had cut deeper than any blade. Ilara had retreated to her small chamber above the kitchens and locked the door. She had not screamed, had not wept. She had simply sat on the edge of her narrow bed and pressed her palm to the scar on her hip, feeling it burn with a heat that should have been impossible. If he had truly chosen another, the mark should have faded, should have released her from the bond that tied her soul to his. Instead, it blazed like a brand. But what did that matter? The message was clear. The king had made his choice, and it was not her. 3 days later, Ilara discovered she was carrying his child. The realization had come with the morning sickness, violent and relentless. The estate's cook had taken one look at her pale face, and knowing smile had confirmed what Ilara already suspected. Pregnant, with the child of a king who had discarded her. For one wild moment, Ilara had considered traveling to the capital, confronting Caven before his wedding, demanding he acknowledge the life growing inside her. But what would that accomplish? If he had cast her aside so easily, why would he want the complication of a bastard child? At best, she would be paid to disappear. At worst, she would be eliminated entirely. A loose end that threatened the legitimacy of his new queen's future heirs. No, she would not beg, would not grovel, would not let her child become a pawn in palace politics. Instead, Ilara had crafted a lie. She told the estate's few remaining servants that her husband, a traveling merchant she had married before arriving at Thornhallow, had died in a bandit attack. The story explained her presence, her condition, and her need to remain at the remote estate where no one would question a grieving widow. The caretaker, perhaps suspecting more than he revealed, had allowed her to stay. The cottage at the edge of the estate's forest had been empty for years. Ilara had cleaned it, furnished it with cast-offs, and made it her home. A home where she had given birth to a son with his father's midnight dark hair and his mother's stubborn chin. A son she had named Tavian. A son who had just turned 15 months old when the world Ilara had carefully constructed came crashing down around her. It began with a sound. Ilara was kneeling in her small garden, Tavian babbling happily beside her in a basket, when the thunder of hoofbeats reached her ears. Not one horse. Many. Approaching fast from the direction of the main road. Her blood turned to ice. In 2 years, no one of importance had visited Thornhallow. The estate had been forgotten, its absent king clearly having no intention of returning to the place where he had made promises he never meant to keep. So who would come now, riding hard enough to shake the earth? Ilara scooped Tavian into her arms and pressed herself against the cottage wall, peering through the gaps in the ancient fence. The riders burst from the tree line, 20 wolves in human form, their mounts lathered with sweat from hard travel. They wore the midnight blue of the royal guard, their cloaks emblazoned with the silver wolf that marked them as the king's own. And at their head, riding a stallion black as shadow, was a figure that made Ilara's heart stop entirely. He was broader than she remembered, harder. His dark hair was longer, pulled back from a face that seemed carved from granite rather than flesh. But those eyes, those molten gold eyes that had once looked at her with such devastating tenderness, she would have known them anywhere. Caven. The Alpha King had returned to Thornhallow. Ilara couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except clutch her son to her chest as the man who had fathered him dismounted not 50 yards from where she stood frozen. Tavian chose that moment to let out a delighted shriek, reaching toward the horses with grabbing hands. Caven's head snapped in their direction. For one eternal heartbeat, his gaze met hers across the overgrown garden. Ilara watched the color drain from his face. She watched his eyes drop to the child in her arms, the child with his exact shade of hair, his exact shape of jaw, his exact golden gaze that had only recently begun to shift from newborn blue. She watched the Alpha King of Eldrin take a single step toward her, his hand outstretched, his lips forming a word that might have been her name. And then, she ran. Ilara did not make it far. The forest behind her cottage had been her sanctuary for 2 years. She knew every path, every hollow, and every hiding place where she could disappear with Tavian until danger passed. But she had forgotten one crucial thing. Caven knew this forest, too. She had barely reached the stream that marked the boundary of the estate when a massive shape exploded from the undergrowth ahead of her. Not a man. A wolf. Enormous, black as midnight, with eyes that burned like molten honey. Ilara skidded to a halt, her arms tightening around Tavian as a scream caught in her throat. The wolf prowled toward her slowly, its huge body blocking the only path forward. Behind her, she heard footsteps, human feet crashing through the brush. She was trapped. Ilara. The voice came from behind her. Human now, rough with an emotion she couldn't identify. She refused to turn around, refused to look at him. "Go away," she said, her voice steadier than she had any right to expect. "You have no business here." "No business?" A harsh laugh. "This is my estate, my land, my—" He stopped abruptly. Ilara felt him move closer, felt the heat of his body behind her like standing too close to a bonfire. The scar on her hip blazed with sudden searing warmth. "Look at me." A command. An alpha's command, weighted with power that pressed against her will like a physical force. Ilara had never been a wolf. She was human. Entirely, ordinarily human, which was part of why their bond was considered impossible by wolf tradition. But the mark he had given her had changed something fundamental in her spirit. She felt his authority like pressure in her chest. She resisted anyway. "I have nothing to say to you, Your Majesty." The title was a weapon, sharp and cold. She felt him flinch. "Ilara, please." The word cracked something in her defenses. In 2 years, she had imagined countless versions of this confrontation. In most of them, he was cold, dismissive, and perhaps even cruel. She had prepared herself for contempt. She had not prepared herself for the raw anguish in his voice. Against her better judgment, she turned. Caven stood 3 feet away, barefoot and disheveled from his shift. His eyes were fixed on Tavian with an intensity that bordered on desperate. Up close, she could see what the distance had hidden. The hollows beneath his cheekbones, the shadows under his eyes, the new lines carved around his mouth. He looked like a man who had not slept in months. "The child," he said hoarsely. "How old?" Ilara lifted her chin. "My son is none of your concern." "How old, Ilara?" "I told you. He has my eyes." The words were barely a whisper. "He has my mother's chin. He has the exact shade of hair that every firstborn in my bloodline has carried for 12 generations. Caven's voice broke. "How old?" Tavian, oblivious to the tension swirling around him, chose that moment to reach toward Caven with both chubby hands. A sound emerged from his small mouth. Not quite a word, but something close. Something that sounded horrifyingly like "da." Ilara watched Caven's composure crack apart. 15 months, she said quietly. "He was born 15 months ago. You can do the mathematics yourself." Caven made a sound like a wounded animal. He reached toward Tavian, then stopped himself, his hand hovering in the air between them. "You were pregnant." His voice was hollow with shock. "When I left for the coronation, you were already carrying my child, and you never told me?" Ilara's fragile composure snapped. "Tell you?" She laughed bitterly. "How exactly was I supposed to do that, Your Majesty? Send a raven to the capital? Congratulations on your wedding to Lady Morwen. By the way, your discarded mistress is carrying your bastard. Enjoy the celebration." Caven staggered as if she had struck him. "My wedding," he repeated slowly. "To Morwen." "Yes, your wedding. The one announced 3 weeks after you left. The one that made every promise you whispered to me into a lie." Ilara's voice shook with 2 years of suppressed fury. "Did you think I would not hear? That I would sit here in this forgotten estate waiting like a fool while you married another woman? I didn't marry her." The words fell between them like stones dropped into still water. Ilara blinked. "What?" "I did not marry Morwen Crestwin." Caven's jaw was tight, his eyes blazing with something that looked almost like hope. "There was no wedding, Ilara. I have taken no queen. I have touched no woman since the night I left you in this forest." "That's impossible." Ilara shook her head. "The message, the royal seal, the entire kingdom was commanded to rejoice. I never sent that message." The forest seemed to hold its breath. "Then who?" Before Caven could answer, a howl split the air. Not the deep call of his royal guard, but something higher, sharper, a warning. Caven's head snapped toward the sound, his body went rigid. "They found us," he said grimly. "Who found us? What are you talking about?" But Caven was already shifting, his body flowing from human to wolf in a single heartbeat. The massive black wolf that emerged fixed Ilara with an urgent stare, then jerked his head toward the cottage. "Run," the gesture said clearly. "Now." Through the trees behind her, Ilara heard new sounds, horses, voices, and beneath them, the low growl of wolves who were not part of Caven's guard. Clutching Tavian to her chest, she ran. She burst from the forest to find chaos consuming the estate. Caven's royal guard had formed a defensive line around the main house, their swords drawn against a force that outnumbered them at least 2 to 1. And leading that force, Seated upon a white horse with her silver hair streaming behind her like a banner was a woman Ilara had never seen but somehow recognized instantly. Lady Morwen Crestwin, the woman who was supposed to be Caven's queen, the woman who, according to Caven, he had never married. Morwen's ice-blue eyes scanned the chaos until they found Ilara standing at the forest's edge. Her perfect lips curled into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "There she is," Morwen announced, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "The king's little secret. And unless I am very much mistaken," her gaze dropped to Tavian and her smile sharpened. "She has brought us exactly what we came for." The mark on Ilara's hip burned like a warning. And somewhere behind her, the Alpha King's howl shook the very foundations of the earth. Everything happened at once. Morwen raised her hand, and her soldiers charged. Caven's black wolf form exploded from the tree line, crashing into the first wave of attackers with savage fury. Steel clashed against claw, screams filled the air, and Ilara ran toward the only place she could think of. The cottage, where she had spent 2 years building a life from broken promises. She was nearly there when a figure stepped from the shadows to block her path. The man was tall, gray-haired, with the bearing of a soldier long past his prime but no less dangerous for it. He wore the Crestwin colors, and his sword was already drawn. "The child," he said flatly. "Give me the child, and you will not be harmed." Ilara backed away slowly, her mind racing. She had no weapon, no training, no way to fight a warrior who had probably been killing before she was born. But she had something else. She had 2 years of desperate love for the boy in her arms, and she had a mark that still burned on her hip, connecting her to the most powerful wolf in the kingdom. "You cannot have him," Ilara said, and was shocked by the steel in her own voice. The soldier sighed as if she had merely inconvenienced him. "Then you will die, and I will take him from your corpse. The outcome is the same. House Crestwin needs that child, woman. You are simply an obstacle." He lunged. Ilara screamed and twisted away, the blade missing her by inches. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on a root, and fell hard against the cottage door. Tavian wailed in terror. The soldier raised his sword for a killing strike, and then stopped. A golden light was emanating from Ilara's chest. She looked down in shock. The glow seemed to pulse from somewhere deep inside her, warm and ancient and utterly foreign. It spread outward, forming a barrier between her and the soldier that he could not seem to penetrate. "What witchcraft is this?" the man demanded, slashing at the light. His blade passed through harmlessly, leaving ripples like a stone thrown into water. Ilara had no answer. She had no magic. She was human. Ordinary, unremarkable, human. But Tavian was not. Her son had stopped crying. His small face was scrunched in concentration, and his chubby hands were pressed against her chest directly over her heart. The golden light seemed to flow from him, through her, creating a shield that no weapon could breach. The blood of the Alpha King. The heir to 12 generations of wolf power, protecting his mother the only way he knew how. "Impossible," the soldier breathed. "The child is not yet 2 years old. He cannot." A black shape slammed into him from the side. Caven's wolf form bore the soldier to the ground, jaws closing around the man's throat before he could scream. One savage shake, and the threat was ended. The golden light faded as Tavian slumped against Ilara's chest, exhausted by whatever instinct had driven him to act. Caven shifted back to human form, his body covered in blood that mostly was not his own. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and fell to his knees before her, his hands hovering over her and Tavian as if afraid to touch them. "Are you hurt?" His voice was ragged. "The light. I felt it through the bond." "Are you hurt?" "The bond?" Ilara shook her head in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I am human. I cannot feel the bond." "But I felt you." Caven's eyes were wild. "When that soldier attacked, I felt your terror like it was my own. The mark. It connected us more deeply than I ever imagined possible. And when the light appeared..." He looked at Tavian with awe. He is magnificent. Our son is magnificent. Our son. The words pierced through 2 years of anger and grief. Cave-in. Ilara's voice wavered. What happened? The message, the wedding announcement. If you did not send it, then who? Morwen. Her family. Caven's expression hardened to stone. They drugged me on the eve of the coronation. A compound that suppressed my wolf and my memories. For 3 weeks, I was a puppet. Signing documents I did not understand. Agreeing to arrangements I would never have accepted. Including an engagement to Lady Morwen? Including that. Disgust dripped from his words. When the drug wore off, I discovered what had been done in my name, the messages sent to every corner of the kingdom, the wedding preparations already underway, and the announcement that had been sent here, to Thornhallow, deliberately designed to make you believe I had betrayed you. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. They knew about me. They knew about us. They had spies at the estate. They knew that the only way to secure my throne was to destroy the bond between us before I could return to claim you. But you did not marry her. The soldier said House Crestwyn needs Tavian. If you are not wed to Morwen, why would they? The answer struck her like a physical blow. They want to control the heir, she whispered. If they cannot have you, they will take your son instead. They will raise him as their puppet, marry him to a Crestwyn when he comes of age, and rule through him. Caven's growl vibrated through the air. They will not touch him, either of you. I will tear House Crestwyn apart stone by stone before I allow. A scream interrupted him. They both turned to see Morwen being dragged from her horse by 2 of Caven's guards. The battle appeared to be ending. Crestwyn soldiers either fled or fallen, but the lady herself was very much alive and absolutely furious. This changes nothing, Morwen shrieked as the guards forced her to her knees. The council has already accepted our betrothal. The documents bear your seal. In the eyes of the law, I am your queen and that half-blood bastard is nothing. Caven rose slowly to his feet. Ilara had seen him angry before, had seen him frustrated, passionate, even desperate. But she had never seen the cold, terrible fury that transformed his features now. You poisoned me, he said quietly. You violated my mind and my will. You sent false messages to the woman I love, hoping to drive her away. You hunted my mate and my son across my own lands with intent to murder or enslave. He stepped toward Morwen with predatory grace. And you dare speak to me of law? Your council will never accept a human as queen. Morwen's voice had lost some of its certainty. The tradition, I am the Alpha King. Each word fell like a hammer. I am the tradition, and any council member who does not accept my true mate will be removed from their position before sunset tomorrow. He turned his back on Morwen dismissively, returning to where Ilara still sat against the cottage door with Tavian sleeping in her arms. When he knelt before her again, the terrible fury had faded. In its place was something far more devastating. Hope, vulnerable and raw. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, Caven said quietly. I failed to protect you. Failed to return when I promised. I missed the birth of my son. Missed his first steps. His first words. Missed everything that I can never get back. Ilara said nothing. The emotions warring inside her were too vast for words. But I am asking anyway, Caven continued. Come back with me. Let me be the mate I should have been from the beginning. Let me spend the rest of my life earning what I should never have lost. Ilara looked at the man who had broken her heart. At the father who had never known his son existed. At the Alpha King who had apparently torn his kingdom apart rather than accept a false queen. The mark on her hip burned with steady warmth. Before she could respond, a horn sounded in the distance. Caven's head snapped toward the sound, his body going rigid. What is that? Ilara asked. Reinforcements. His jaw tightened. But not ours. Through the trees, emerging from the road that led to the capital, came a second army. Larger than the first. Flying banners that bore not the Crestwind serpent but something far worse. the emblem of the royal council. And at their head rode the High Elder himself, his ancient face set in grim determination. Caven of House Valdrin, the elder's voice rang out across the bloody courtyard. You are accused of breaking your sworn betrothal, threatening council authority, and harboring an unregistered heir. You will surrender yourself and the child for judgment, or you will be declared enemy of the realm. Morwen's laughter echoed through the sudden silence. I told you, she called out triumphantly. The law is on my side. Your little human cannot save you now. Ilara looked at Caven. Caven looked at the army surrounding them, and Tavian, sleeping peacefully against his mother's heart, began to glow again. The courtyard had become a cage. Council soldiers surrounded them on all sides, their spears forming a bristling wall of steel. Caven's royal guard, bloodied from the battle with Morwen's forces, stood in a protective circle around Ilara and Tavian, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. The High Elder dismounted with the slow dignity of a man who knew he held all the power. This does not need to end in more bloodshed, the Elder said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient authority. Surrender the child and the human woman. Accept your lawful betrothal to Lady Morwen. The realm requires stability, Caven. Your personal desires are irrelevant. Ilara felt Caven's fury through the bond, a scorching wave of rage that made her mark burn white-hot. But when he spoke, his voice was terrifyingly calm. Tell me, Elder Harwin, Caven said softly. Were you part of it from the beginning? The drugging? The false messages? Or did the Crestwind simply purchase your loyalty afterward? A flicker of something, guilt, fear, crossed the Elder's weathered face. I do not know what you are implying. I am implying nothing. I am stating fact. Caven stepped forward, and despite being surrounded by hundreds of soldiers, every man in the courtyard took an instinctive step back. You knew I was poisoned. You knew my wolf was suppressed. You witnessed me sign documents while I was barely conscious, and you said nothing. The coronation required you to protect your king. The roar shook the ancient walls of Thornhallow. Instead, you conspired with traitors to steal my throne, my will, and my mate. Ilara watched the soldiers' expressions shift. Uncertainty crept into their ranks. These were not Crestwind men. They served the council, which meant they served the crown. And the crown was currently accusing their commanders of treason. Elder Harwin seemed to sense the change. His eyes darted to Morwen, who had gone very still. The documents are signed, Harwin said, but his voice had lost its certainty. The law recognizes the true mate bond above all other contracts. Caven's hand moved to his throat, pulling aside the collar of his torn shirt to reveal unmarked skin. Where is Morwen's claiming bite, Elder? Where is the proof of a completed bond? Silence. She has not bitten me because she cannot. Caven's smile was sharp as a blade. A wolf cannot claim a mate who already belongs to another. My bond with Ilara was sealed 2 years ago. Every document signed during my drug state is void, because I was never free to give consent. Ilara's breath caught. She had not known that, had not understood that his secret bite had legal implications beyond the personal. Elder Harwin's face had gone gray. If what you say is true, it is true. Caven turned to address the assembled soldiers directly. You were told to arrest a rogue king who threatened the realm, but I am not rogue. I am your rightful sovereign, bound to my true mate, father to the heir you see in her arms. The only traitors here wear Crestwind colors and elder robes. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. Spears that had been pointed aggressively began to waver. Morwen's composure finally cracked. He's lying, she shrieked. There is no bond. The woman is human. She cannot be a wolf's true mate. It's impossible. Impossible? Caven laughed coldly. Then explain why my wolf has been tearing itself apart for 2 years, driving me half mad with the need to find her. Explain why I can feel her heartbeat through the mark I gave her even now. Explain why our son, our not yet 2-year-old son, just manifested protective magic that has not appeared in the royal bloodline for 9 generations. He pointed at Tavian, who had woken and was watching the confrontation with unnervingly intelligent golden eyes. That child is proof of a true mate bond. The only way such power could manifest so young is if both parents were bonded at conception. Every elder knows this. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. Which means you knew, Harwin. You knew she was my true mate. And you helped the Crestwinds tear us apart anyway. Elder Harwin's silence was a confession. The soldiers' spears lowered entirely. Several men stepped away from the elder, their expressions hardening with disgust. Captain Varric! Caven called out. A broad-shouldered soldier near the front snapped to attention. Your Majesty. You command the council guard. What is your oath? To protect the crown and uphold the true laws of Eldrin. And what does the true law say about those who drug a king and forge documents in his name? Captain Varric's jaw tightened. He turned to look at Elder Harwin, at Morwen, at the Crestwind soldiers who had attacked their king's own estate. Treason, the captain said quietly. The penalty is death. Morwen bolted. She made it 3 steps before a massive gray wolf intercepted her, bearing her to the ground with practiced efficiency. The wolf shifted to reveal one of Caven's personal guards, who bound her wrists while she screamed curses at everyone within hearing. Elder Harwin did not run. He simply stood, shoulders slumped, as Captain Varric's men surrounded him. I did what I thought was best for the realm, Harwin said quietly. A human queen would have caused chaos. The noble houses would never have accepted. The noble houses will accept what their king commands. Caven's voice held no mercy. Take him away. He will face judgment before the full council. A council that will be purged of every member who participated in this conspiracy. As the elder was led away, Caven turned back to Ilara. The fury drained from his features, replaced by exhaustion and something achingly vulnerable. He crossed the courtyard to where she still sat against the cottage door, sinking to his knees before her. It's over, he said hoarsely. Morwen is captured, Harwin is exposed. The soldiers have returned to their rightful loyalty. Ilara looked at the chaos around them, at the bodies of fallen wolves, both friend and enemy, at the blood soaking into the earth of what had been her peaceful garden. Is it over? She asked quietly. Or is this just the beginning? They found the spy within the hour. Ilara had not wanted to believe it, but when the soldiers dragged old Brennick, the estate's caretaker, before Caven in chains, the evidence was undeniable. Letters bearing the Crestwind seal hidden beneath his floorboards, a pouch of gold coins that represented more wealth than a servant could earn in 10 lifetimes. And worst of all, a detailed record of Tavian's development, his first shift of eye color, his first attempt at words, the exact shade of gold that sometimes flickered in his gaze when he was angry. You watched over me, Ilara said quietly, staring at the man who had given her shelter, who had allowed her to stay when she had nowhere else to go. You let me believe you were kind, and the whole time, you were selling my son to people who wanted to use him as a puppet. Brennick's weathered face showed no remorse. The child is an abomination. A half-blood sitting on the throne of Eldrin? The ancestors would weep. Caven's growl vibrated through the hall. The ancestors recognized true mate bonds as sacred above all bloodline politics. You have twisted their teachings to justify your betrayal. I justified nothing. I served the natural order. Brennick's eyes found Ilara with cold contempt. You should have stayed in whatever gutter you crawled from, girl. You were never meant for a crown. Before Caven could respond, before the guards could act, Ilara stepped forward. You are right, she said softly. I was never meant for a crown. Brennick's eyes narrowed with wary triumph. I was meant for something far more important. Ilara's voice strengthened with each word. I was meant to be the mother of a child who will unite wolf and humankind. I was meant to be the mate of a king who would rather tear apart his own kingdom than accept a false queen. And I was meant to show every creature in this realm that worth is not determined by blood or birth, but by the choices we make and the love we carry. She stepped closer to Brennick, close enough to see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. You call my son an abomination, but Tavian manifested protective magic at 15 months old, magic that has not appeared in the royal bloodline for 9 generations. He did it to save me, a human, and his mother. That is not abomination, that is evolution. Ilara turned her back on the traitor, facing Kavan instead. I have spent 2 years hiding. 2 years teaching my son to be invisible, to be small, to be safe. I will not raise him in fear any longer. Her chin lifted with resolve she had not known she possessed. If you want me as your queen, I will stand beside you. Not as a decoration or a symbol, but as a partner, an equal. Kavan's eyes blazed with golden fire. That is all I have ever wanted, he said hoarsely. He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. The bond between them roared to life. Not the tentative pulse she had grown accustomed to, but a flood of emotion so overwhelming it stole her breath. His love, his desperation, his bone-deep relief at finally having her close again. And beneath it all, a question. Burning. Urgent. Afraid of the answer. Will you complete the bond? Will you claim me as I claimed you? Ilara pulled back to look at him. The most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms stood before her, waiting for a human woman to decide his fate. Yes, she whispered. Then she rose on her toes and pressed her teeth to the curve of his throat. The bond exploded. She saw everything. She saw the night of the coronation through his eyes, the creeping confusion as the drug took hold, the horror of waking 3 days later with no memory of what he had done. She felt his desperate search through the bond, clawing at the connection that grew fainter each day as she fled further from Thornhallow. She experienced his sleepless nights, his confrontations with the Crestwinds, his slow descent toward a madness that only finding her could cure. She saw herself through his eyes, not a servant or a nobody, but a miracle, the mate his wolf had recognized before his human mind caught up. The mother of his child, carrying the future of his bloodline while believing herself abandoned. I am so sorry, his voice echoed through the bond. I will spend eternity making it right. You already have, she answered. You came for us. When Ilara finally released his throat, she saw that tears were streaming down Kavan's face. Her own cheeks were wet as well. My queen, he breathed. My king, she answered. Around them, wolves began to howl, not in warning or in battle, but in celebration. The sound swelled as soldier after soldier lifted their voices, joining a chorus that rolled across Thornhallow and beyond. Their king had found his true mate. The bond was complete. The realm had a queen at last. The great hall of the capital palace was filled with wolves from every corner of Eldrin. But this gathering was nothing like the coronation that had gone so wrong 2 years before. There were no drugs in the wine, no conspirators lurking in shadows, no false promises waiting to be broken. There was only Kavan, resplendent in ceremonial black and gold, and Ilara beside him in a gown of silver that matched the claiming mark now visible on her throat. And between them, held proudly in his father's arms, was Tavian. People of Eldrin! Kavan's voice rang through the hall. I present to you my son, Tavian of House Valdrin, heir to the throne, child of a true mate bond. The hall erupted in cheers. Tavian, perhaps sensing the significance of the moment, chose that exact instant to demonstrate his unusual gifts. Golden light bloomed from his small hands, dancing between his fingers like captured sunlight. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The light of the first alpha, an elderly scholar breathed from the front row. It has not manifested since the founding bloodline. Ilara smiled and took her son from Kavan's arms. The golden light shifted to wrap around her as well, warm and protective. Oh, our son will lead Eldrin into a new era, she announced. An era where humans and wolves stand as equals, where true mate bonds are honored above political convenience, where children like Tavian are celebrated for their gifts rather than feared for their differences. She looked at Kavan, finding his golden gaze blazing with pride and love. This is the future we will build together. Together, he echoed, from this moment until our last breath. The wolves of Eldrin howled their approval, and the sound shook the ancient rafters of the palace. 3 years later, the gardens of Thornhallow had been transformed. What had once been a wild, overgrown tangle was now a carefully tended paradise, filled with flowers that bloomed in every color. But some wildness remained. Patches of forest deliberately left untamed, spaces where young children could run and climb and practice the shifting that came naturally to them. Tavian was 4 years old now, and he was extraordinary. Not just because of the golden light that danced at his fingertips when he laughed, not just because he could shift between human and wolf form with an ease that seasoned warriors envied, but because he had inherited his mother's compassion along with his father's strength. Ilara watched from the garden bench as Tavian crouched beside a wounded bird, his small hands glowing as he carefully knit its broken wing back together. The healing gift had manifested 6 months ago, shocking everyone. Beside him, his 2-year-old sister Ilara watched with wide-eyed fascination, already showing signs of her own emerging abilities. "He gets that from you," Caven said, settling onto the bench beside Ilara. "I have no magic. You have something better. You have a heart that cannot stand to see suffering." His arm wrapped around her shoulders. "Both our children have learned kindness from your example." The bird fluttered its healed wing experimentally, then took flight. Tavian whooped with delight, and Ilara clapped her tiny hands. "Did you see? Did you see?" Tavian shouted, running toward them with his sister toddling behind. "I fixed it." Ilara caught her son as he launched himself into her arms, then scooped up Ilara as well. "I saw my heart. You were magnificent." Caven's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing as the bond hummed between them. 2 years ago, she had been a servant girl hiding in a forgotten cottage with a broken heart and a child who should never have existed. Now she was a queen, a mother of 2, a mate whose bond had survived poison, conspiracy, and every obstacle their enemies could devise. And in the great tapestry of Eldrin's history, a new chapter continued to be woven. The story of a king who had torn apart a kingdom to find his mate. Of a woman who had raised a miraculous child alone in the wilderness. Of a love that had conquered every force that tried to destroy it. They had found each other against all odds, and they would never be parted again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.